Bianca, this is Jonathan, and Fernando, my colleague.
This is hydraulic fracking, right? Or is it not? Yeah.
Well, our story doesn't need to be about fracking. Our story is about horizontal drilling, but it happens that in the data, it's horizontal drilling combined with hydraulic fracking. Yeah.
So there are these concerns about contamination of wells. Yes. You need a lot of water to do that. Then you have the wastewater. The wastewater is contaminated. So yeah, I mean, it sort of feeds back to Jane's comments. Maybe it's not the individual parcel that is directly affected, but there's also this counter effect that if you had like if, let's say people are actually concerned about the environmental impact, then it's harder for them to mobilize against sort of to get together if they're fractured. Whereas if you have one big landowner, then who happens to be opposed, doesn't seem to be a big problem here. Yeah. But maybe so it's not clear. Like your story was all about the anti-commons being bad, but if you had environmental concerns, then that would sort of feed in a different direction.
Yeah, the gridlock could help if your goal was to prevent fracking or the development of oil shale. I think in this setting, the worst of all worlds, the worst position to be in is have fracking going on all around you. So you're exposed to all the environmental disamenities, but not be able to profit from your own shale, because it's as you saw on the figure, it's everywhere. So I think in this setting, everyone's exposed to the fracking environment, but some people are undergoing delays in terms of profiting from that exposure. So they're bearing the costs and not getting any benefits. Yeah.
I was struck by the geometry of your blue dots and lines. I half expected to see a lot of asterisks where the vertical hole was drilled and then all the horizontals came out of that in a radial pattern. And there's only 2 or 3 that are like that. And I'm wondering if that's something that you ought to take into account structurally in your model, that something's going on either technically or with the problem of putting parcels together, that you can't have the best geometry, which would be go everywhere.
Yeah, we've thought about this a lot. Yeah. So talk to oil and gas people about this.
We actually thought, because there are 2 or 3 places on the map where you see this sort of wagon wheel spoking thing, and it's on tribal land. And so we thought that must be the optimal way to do it. It turns out those things are on the edge of the river and they're spoking out to get under the river. And the optimal way to do it is actually to do basically as many parallel lines as you can, because what happens when you frack is you pull oil in from like a certain distance of either side of the line. And basically, if you go at an angle, then the wells communicate and you're sort of double sucking from certain areas, which is not optimal. So what you would like, if you were to do this at the landscape level, would just be to exhaust the space with parallel lines, so that there's no overlap in where you're drawing the oil. So it turns out that the spoking is actually not what you want to do.
It's like what a single owner would do if they own the landscape is what we think is what he described, but conditional on what you have. If you have a square parcel and a bunch of small parcels around you, the spoking could be optimal, conditional on. So it's a really complicated constrained optimization problem with a different solution at the landscape level than at the parcel level. Yeah. Sorry.
Fernando, I work in the State Department. He was my neighbor.
So the question is, imagine I take these results and I interpret this in another way. So what you're telling me is that this anti-commons problem is not very important because, yes, there are a few more day delays, but at the end, all of those places are drilled anyways. So, yeah, it's of course, transaction costs increase, you delay a few more days, but at the end, it doesn't prevent the exploitation of this natural resource. So how do you counter-argument control that?
It's a great question, and on our to-do list is to try to monetize the delay cost. And we think they're high, but we actually haven't done the calculations to verify that. I will say that as of 2015, some of our regressions look at the probability that, a linear probability model, the probability you have a well by 2015. And these contracting costs are a strong predictor that you won't have a well. So as of 2015, there's still a lot of unexploited places. So it's some combination of delay and lower probability of getting drilled that we have to quantify. We haven't done that.
Are you looking at any outcome variables like income and things that supposedly we're interested in this because the resource boom is going to generate some benefits.
Yeah.
So on the individual or the tribal level. So have you thought about this to make this?
Well, we don't have data on royalty payments, so we're kind of limited in what we can do at the individual level, but we could do something at the more aggregate level.
Sure. Well, it's partially not a question, and maybe it'll sound a little bit off topic, but I think part of this whole thing is to be somewhat, I guess, applicable to real life, and policy decision and your guys' knowledge as well. I'm a chief of an Indian band. I used to be a former SFU student, and that's how I found out about this. But I thought your group was really interesting, and the way to think about anti-commons, because I think about it in terms of our traditional governance and how we governed our territory. So I'm one band of 17, and so we looked after things on a kind of a watershed basis in some ways. So in thinking of this and thinking about, I guess you in the States won't be familiar with a recent court decision last year where the Chilcotin Nation got a part of their land back as title. And so what's happening in the last year is them negotiating with the province on jurisdiction over larger things because they won't be able to manage like forest fires and stuff like that. And so the way the Chilcotin Nation has 6 bands that make up their whole nation. So a similar thing is happening where the province and the feds will be undermining the nation approach in order to be able to push resource extraction through. So in a similar way that Indian bands were created to I guess, break up whole nations and collective decision making, there's a parallel to the problem that you're talking about too. And the solution, the reason the province and the feds will continue to try and undermine the nationhood of the Chilcotin is because through our traditional governance, we would have two or more layers of property rights. So your band would be in charge of a certain area of land that was manageable. And then when it came to watershed decisions or nation decisions, you couldn't exploit a resource, overexploit a resource without consulting with the entire nation. And so there are two levels of governance, and so you solve that the issues of over privatization or under privatization. There was that solution already. And so what I'm just stating is we're already seeing it in policy, and the Canadian and provincial governments see this and are acting accordingly.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Fernando.